Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
June 12, 2021, the Coming Undone edition. And we begin with this story. It's a cautionary tale of a hedge fund manager who came undone and is heading to prison. And it involves Dan Kaminsky, who broke bankruptcy laws when, on a recorded phone call, he pleaded with a banker in a bankruptcy proceeding not to take action which benefited the creditors, of which Kaminsky was on the creditors committee. Then he later, recognizing his mistake, called back and asked the banker to forget the whole thing and change his story when the regulators came knocking. He's now going to jail for 6 months. But it's really a story about how Kaminsky came undone during the pandemic, locked in his basement, never getting out. He had a support group which helped him prior to that time, but he did not have access to that, at least live, during the pandemic. So a very cautionary tale. Hopefully it's not something that we'll have to deal with as much going forward, but it really speaks to the pressures of work and how taking care of yourself continues to be an important part of a daily regime. All our stories come from the Wall Street Journal today, I should have said. But there was an interesting story about the evolution of whistleblowing. They take it back to ancient Rome, but the Pentagon Papers, WikiLeaks, and of course in the context of the leaks of the tax returns of the top, some of the top billionaires in the United States. Whether that broke any laws or not is yet to be determined. Nevertheless, it has caused an outcry in Congress to make the tax system fairer. So, the story of whistleblowing. Next up, the German lawmakers have approved a law at boosting women in corporate boardrooms. Some of Germany's largest companies must now ensure that at least one woman will be on their management board under legislation passed by the country's lower house of parliament. The bill would require publicly listed companies that have more than 2,000 employees more than 3 management board seats and a supervisory board structure with equal representation from employees and shareholders to include at least one woman on their board going forward. So kudos to Germany for passing this law. And our final story is about the hedge fund manager who took on Exxon and won. Christopher James, who started engine number 1 and saw the opportunity and really need for Exxon to increase its value through moving towards a more carbon neutral footprint, put together a plan to take on Exxon and on this issue and did so. What is important for the board member, for the compliance officer, for the corporation around this was clearly an opportunity that an investor saw, and he was able to convince other investors that the company needed to change directions, and he used that information, obviously with data and analytics, to convince other investors to vote on new directors on Exxon's board of directors. It should be studied.
The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.